Okay, so I would like to thank once again the organizers for giving me the possibility to talk about the important topic of stroke here today for you. So, as you might all know, stroke is one of the leading causes of death in all developed countries. And so stroke is most often ischemic. This means that there's a thrombus that occludes one of the arteries in the brain. And in the treatment of acute ischemic stroke, the most important thing, the primary goal, is the removal of this thrombus in order to restore the blood supply and to reduce the brain damage. And this is what the phrase, time is brain, emphasizes. So how to remove this thrombus? We have two major ways. One is called thrombolysis. It's a pharmacological way, so it's given in the form of a short infusion, and it can be applied within a short time frame, within 4.5 hours after the onset of the symptoms. And the other way is to remove the thrombus mechanically by a catheter, and this is called thrombectomy. This can naturally be done only in case of large vessel occlusions and within 6 hours after the onset of the symptoms. So what happens during thrombolysis? In the infusion here, there's an enzyme which transforms this other enzyme, plasminogen to plasmin, and it will act as a scissor. So it will start to cleave the thrombus to small degradation products, and hopefully the thrombus will then slowly diminish. And the 1-hour infusion protocol is needed to overcome the effect of some endogenous inhibitors, such as PI1. So let's look at this in real life. Okay, this is a patient with acute ischemic stroke. He has left-sided hemiparesis, which means that he can move his right arm and right leg, but you will see that he is unable to move his left leg and left arm. See, he cannot move his left arm. Okay, now watch this. Only 46 minutes after the initiation of the treatment, he can again move his left leg and also his left arm and hand perfectly. Right? So it looks like a miracle, right? But unfortunately, this treatment is not a miracle for all. So thrombolysis only works in approximately 30 to 40% of the cases, while in the majority of patients, no change will occur. Moreover, in approximately 6 to 8% of cases, a fierce side effect will occur, which is intracerebral bleeding, bleeding to the brain. And the problem is that when the doctors apply this therapy, they cannot tell whether a patient will have the best outcome or they will die due to intracerebral bleeding. So actually, this problem represents the holy grail of thrombolysis research. So our mission is basically to understand the causes of this, the causes of thrombolysis failure, and also to develop tests to predict the efficacy and safety of the therapy. Okay, so in Debrecen, what we did is we developed a biobank about a decade ago where we started to collect the blood samples of patients with acute ischemic stroke that were treated with thrombolysis or thrombectomy. And also, naturally, we collected their clinical data and outcome. And we started to perform laboratory measurements. So our first guess was here to test the inhibitors, right? PI1, to see if this has anything to do with the outcomes. And to cut the story short, this was not the holy grail that we were looking for, so there was no association with the outcomes. So as a researcher, you don't give up, you move on to another guess. So our next guess was this inhibitor here. It's called alpha-2 plasmin inhibitor. And this was more likely to be it. So we saw an association between alpha-2 plasmin inhibitor levels and survival of the patients. So patients that had lower levels at admission had worse outcomes. And as you can see on these survivor curves, so patients with normal levels of alpha-2 plasmin inhibitor had better survivals as compared to those with low levels at admission. So actually, there was a very simple explanation to this that we looked in later. So patients with normal levels of alpha-2-plasmin inhibitor had small thrombi that were easy to lyse, and patients with large thrombus burden, large thrombi, had low amounts of this protein because it was all built up here, and it was more difficult to lyse. So, but then naturally we really wanted to have a test with which we can predict outcomes. So we were focusing more here on the scissor itself. Okay, and so we teamed up with Australian colleagues, and we decided to do a quick test to predict outcomes. And our hypothesis was this, that the capacity of a person to generate plasmin, the scissor, in vivo would impact the outcome of thrombolysis. So we did the test, and we started to test patients, and we saw that the capacity of patients to generate this enzyme varied greatly, over 100-fold, and we tested it in different cohorts in patients from Spain, from Australia, and Hungary. And naturally, we really wanted to see whether doing this test before therapy could predict what will happen after. And so we did, and actually the correlation was remarkable, almost perfect. It was 0.93. You know, the best correlation is 1. So actually doing this test before therapy could predict the in vivo response of the therapy. So we're really hoping to get this into the clinical practice soon. But at the end of my talk, I would like to tell you a story about alcohol that puts the whole mission to Holy Grail in a very different perspective to me. So raise your hands if you're above 18. Oh, thank you. So you can stay here. So it happened once that I have a colleague in the neurology department. His name is Tamás Árokszállási, and we were having a coffee. So, and he asked me, oh, so do you know about this quite infamous pub in Debrecen? It's called the Violet Pub, Ibolya Kocsma. I said, well, yeah, I heard about it. So he said, you know, I have an observation, and you live for these moments when you're researchers. So he said that his observation is that every now and then they get a patient admitted directly from this pub to their center with stroke. So they are drunk and have stroke at the same time. And his observation was that these patients always walk out on their feet the next day, while the regular patients, he said, you know, the sober patients, they have the not so good outcomes as usual. So I said, this is a fantastic observation. Let's do a study on it. And we called this the Violet study. So what we did is, it was a retrospective analysis. So we collected patients, we enrolled patients who had acute ischemic stroke with detectable blood alcohol level during the thrombolysis treatment. And this was of 2 centers, of a center in Budapest and Debrecen. And for we had 60 of these patients. And for every patient, we had 3 controls that were without any alcohol intake and had thrombolysis. And these controls were matched for age, sex, the affected brain area, and the severity of the stroke. So they were the same in these regards. So this is what we got for the controls. You know, the good outcome, 36%, really the textbook data, no change in 54% of the cases, and 5% of bleeding. So this is what we expected. Okay? And this is what we saw for the alcohol group. So 82% good outcomes, right? And just 1% of bleeding. So this is how I felt, actually. And so I said, but let's look at the long-term outcomes. And the long-term outcomes are also very, very good. So 78% of the alcohol group had the best outcome, and it was only 47% for the other group. Okay, so I said, but we had a lot of questions, of course. Is it dose-dependent? So actually it is. So the more you drink, it's better. So the higher blood alcohol concentration led to even better outcomes. And this we were able to prove because we went to our biobank and took samples and did an in vitro clot lysis assay and saw a reverse correlation with blood alcohol concentration. So patients that had higher alcohol levels had shorter clot lysis times, meaning that the lysis of their clots were faster. And we were able to prove this also in healthy plasma samples that we spiked with ethanol. So actually we are here at this point in the story, so the mission is still ongoing. And what we can tell you at this moment, that probably the success of thrombolysis depends on many factors, of course. One is the size of the thrombus. The other is the capacity to generate plasmin on the surface. And of course, time that matters, the early recanalization of the vessel. And this is where probably alcohol might help. So remember, alcohol may be the answer here, but certainly will make you forget the questions. So please drink only responsibly, and if you're over age. So with this, I'd like to thank to everyone who worked on this project, these very bright students that I have, and thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Zsuzsa. That's very exciting. Any question from the audience? A microphone. Wait for the microphone, please.
So thank you, very interesting observation that before we send all the young people to the pubs to protect themselves, is there any literature data on how regular consumption of alcohol may affect your getting a stroke, the probability of getting a stroke?
Yeah, the chronic consumption, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, of course, also in our model, we controlled for chronic consumption of alcohol, so we divided them for the level of being drinkers, so being moderate or heavy drinkers, and also looked for various laboratory parameters of chronic alcoholism, such as MCV, gamma GT, etc. And even after we corrected for these parameters in the statistical model, the acute alcohol intake remained highly significant. So the odds ratio was incredible. And also the dose-dependent effect was what tells us that it's probably the acute alcohol effect and not the chronic.
Okay, I understand it, but I'm asking...
literature data.
No, I mean literature. So obviously, if you get a stroke, it's better if you have alcohol in your system. But getting a stroke, is it affected by regular alcohol consumption based on literature data?
A chronic or acute?
Well, acute, I don't think. I mean,
whichever.
if you just
I
drink.
don't think there is any literature data on this. Mm-hmm. Our question is basically if, so of course we are on a long-term thinking about interventional therapy, like an adjunctive therapy to thrombolysis. And for this, we have to understand the mechanism behind it, because we have to know whether alcohol helps before the event of stroke, or is still okay if you apply it together with the thrombolytic agents after the clot is formed. So is a really big difference there. But there's very little known on this, and there are no really few animal models, although the mice models are not perfect for this, but still we know very little. So we're in the beginning of this journey.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other question from the audience? In the middle, please. There in the middle. Please wait for the microphone.
So in your previous answer, you mentioned that there are some differences between acute alcohol consumption and light drinkers. And my question will be, if basically I'm at a pub and drinking a little beer or gasoline than absinthe vodka or more highly alcohol consumption. So is there an effect between the alcohol level in the system and the protectiveness that it provides in the order of thrombolysis?
What is the mechanism, is your question?
Not the mechanism, basically that higher alcohol level, does it give a higher protection in order?
Yes. Yeah, so it was dose dependent, as we saw. So we particularly saw a threshold of 2% alcohol levels, which was also seen in the in vitro experiments, and when we took healthy plasma samples and spiked it with various concentration of ethanol, we also saw this threshold. Yeah, we don't know why. We are thinking that probably some of the inhibitors might be involved. We really don't know at this point.
Thank you for that.
But it was dose dependent.
Any further questions from the audience? If there are none, then thank you very much again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Zsuzsa.